My parents left me nothing in their will, but gave everything to my brother, so I taught them a lesson they'll never forget. When my parents passed away, I expected a fair split of the inheritance. I wasn't greedy, I just thought my brother and I would be treated equally. But when the will was read, I got nothing. Your brother will take care of you, the lawyer read aloud. We trust him to do what's right. Except my brother? He didn't do what was right. He took everything, the house, the savings, my parents' belongings, and left me with nothing. When I confronted him, he just shrugged. Mom and Dad trusted me more. Guess you should have been a better son. He thought I'd just accept it. He thought I'd walk away quietly. But if he thought he could steal my future and get away with it, he was in for a rude awakening. Before we jump into today's video, I need your help. We've noticed the channel is losing some traction, and subscribing is one of the best ways you can support us. It's quick, free, and it helps us keep bringing you awesome content. Your support means the world. Let's keep this channel growing together. Thanks so much. Now, let's start the video. When I walked into the lawyer's office for the reading of my parents' will, I had no idea that my entire world was about to collapse. I wasn't expecting a fortune. My parents were comfortable, but not wealthy, and I had always assumed their estate would be split fairly between my brother, Mark, and me. After all, that's what parents do. They look out for their children. But when the lawyer started reading, something felt off. To our beloved son, Mark, we leave our home, our savings, and all of our personal assets. We know you will handle things responsibly and do what is right for the family. Then, after a long pause, the lawyer turned to me. To our son, we leave... He cleared his throat awkwardly. We trust Mark to take care of him. That was it. Nothing, no money, no sentimental items, not even a damn mention of my name beyond that single line. I felt like I had been punched in the gut. There has to be a mistake, I said, my voice shaking. That doesn't make sense. But Mark, he just smirked. Guess Mom and Dad trusted me more, he said, leaning back in his chair. Maybe you should have been a better son. My blood ran cold. He had known. He had known this was coming. I clenched my fists. So what? You get everything and I get nothing? That's fair to you. Mark shrugged. They knew I'd be responsible with it. And hey, if you ever need a little help, I might be willing to throw you some cash. You know, if you ask nicely. I saw red. My own brother, the person I had grown up with, the person I had always treated like family, had just looked me in the eye and told me I was worthless. I could have walked away. I could have accepted defeat. But if Mark thought he could steal my future and walk away untouched, he was about to learn just how wrong he was. I walked out of that lawyer's office with rage boiling in my veins. My parents had trusted Mark to do what was right with their estate. And what did he do? He took everything. The house, the savings, even their personal belongings. All of it belonged to him now. And me? I was expected to beg. I could still hear his smug voice echoing in my head. Maybe you should have been a better son. Like I had done something wrong. Like I hadn't spent years taking care of our parents while he barely showed up. Like I was worth less than him. But if he thought I was just going to accept it and walk away, he was dead wrong. That night, I started digging. I went through old paperwork, bank statements, anything I could find. And then, I found something interesting. The house wasn't fully paid off. See, our parents had refinanced the house a few years before they passed. Mark might have inherited it, but he had also inherited the debt. And guess what? He didn't have the money to cover it. He had assumed he'd get the house free and clear, that he could either live in it or sell it for a big payout. But in reality, he was drowning in hidden expenses. That was my opening. I called the bank the next morning. Since I had been listed as a secondary contact on some of our parents' financial accounts, I had just enough information to start asking questions. And what I found, Mark was completely screwed. The mortgage was due, the property taxes were stacking up, and the house wasn't worth nearly as much as he thought it was. So, while he was celebrating his big win, thinking he had stolen everything from me, I was getting ready to burn his world to the ground. While Mark was sitting pretty, thinking he had won, I was planning my next move. He had no idea that the house he was bragging about wasn't fully paid off. He had no clue that the inheritance he stole came with massive hidden costs. And I I was about to make sure he felt every single one of them. The first thing I did was let the bank do its job. Since I was listed as a secondary contact on some of my parents' financial records, I had access to key documents. And what did those documents tell me? Mark was about to be in deep financial trouble. I called the mortgage company and confirmed what I had suspected. There were missed payments. My parents had taken out a loan against the house a few years ago, probably thinking they'd pay it off gradually. But now that they were gone, the responsibility fell on Mark. And Mark had no clue. The moment the payments stopped coming, the bank would start foreclosure proceedings. And since Mark had zero experience handling bills, I was willing to bet he hadn't even thought about property taxes, maintenance costs, or insurance. So, while he was sitting back, thinking he had beaten me, I was watching the walls slowly close in around him. Then came the final nail in the coffin. I made a few calls to old family friends, distant relatives, even some of my parents' business connections. I let it slip that Mark had taken everything for himself, that our parents had trusted him to be fair, and he had cut me out completely. Word spread fast. Suddenly, Mark wasn't the golden child anymore. People started asking questions. Friends and relatives stopped taking his calls. He had assumed he could steal everything and still walk away with his reputation intact. But now, everyone knew exactly what kind of man he really was, and he had no idea that things were about to get even worse. It didn't take long for the pressure to start closing in on Mark. At first, he was still acting smug, untouchable, convinced that he had won. But reality? It was creeping up on him fast. The first sign that things were falling apart came when he realized the house wasn't free. I got a call from an old family friend who had overheard Mark ranting at a bar, furious that he had suddenly been hit with a mortgage payment he hadn't expected. Apparently, he had assumed that since our parents had left him the house, it would be completely paid off. It wasn't, and now he was on the hook for thousands of dollars he didn't have. Then came the property taxes. Turns out, Mark had no idea that inheriting a house came with yearly financial responsibilities. I knew for a fact that he hadn't set anything aside for taxes, which meant one thing. He was now in deep trouble with the local tax office. And the best part? His big plan to sell the house and cash out. That wasn't happening either. The real estate market wasn't in his favor, and even if it was, word had already spread through the family about what he had done. Nobody wanted to help him. Nobody was offering him support. And suddenly, he was completely alone. But I wasn't done yet. I made sure everyone knew the truth. I didn't even have to lie. I just let the facts speak for themselves. How our parents had trusted him to do the right thing. How he had cut me out completely. How he had taken everything, expecting me to beg. And now, the same people he had been bragging to, they weren't so impressed anymore. I started getting messages from relatives and old friends, asking if what they had heard was true. Some were furious on my behalf, disgusted that Mark had betrayed our parents' wishes. Others, they just wanted to watch the drama unfold. Mark, of course, was completely unaware of what I had been doing, until he called me. I was sitting in my kitchen when my phone rang. The second I saw his name, I knew. He was cracking. "What the hell did you do?" he snapped the moment I answered. I leaned back in my chair, smirking. "What are you talking about, Mark?" "Don't play dumb," he hissed. "Everyone's turning against me. I can't sell the house. I can't make the payments. And now, people are treating me like I'm the bad guy." I chuckled. "That's because you are the bad guy, Mark." Silence. Then, "You did this on purpose." I didn't deny it. "You made your choice, Mark. You thought you could take everything and walk away untouched. How's that working out for you?" I could hear his breathing get heavier. He was panicking, realizing that for the first time in his life, he wasn't the one in control. "I need money," he finally admitted, his voice low. "I just need a little help until I figure things out." I laughed. Actually laughed. "Oh, you mean like how I needed help when Mom and Dad died? Like how you told me to ask nicely if I wanted anything?" He didn't respond. "Let me make this simple for you," I continued, my voice cold. "I'm not giving you a single cent, and I'm sure as hell not going to save you from the mess you made. You wanted everything for yourself. Now you get to deal with everything yourself." There was a long pause. Then, in a voice I had never heard from Mark before, one filled with real fear, he asked, What am I supposed to do? I smirked. Figure it out? And then I hung up. Mark had stolen everything from me. But now, he had nothing. After hanging up on Mark, I sat there for a long time, letting it sink in. For years, he had walked around with an untouchable arrogance, convinced that he was always one step ahead of everyone else. He thought he was invincible, but now, he was drowning. The inheritance he had stolen was nothing more than a pile of unpaid bills and broken promises. And the best part? There was nothing I needed to do. I had already set everything in motion. Now, all I had to do was sit back and watch him fall apart. And fall apart, he did. Over the next few weeks, the cracks became impossible to ignore. Relatives who had once praised him now avoided him. Friends who used to admire his success started questioning his choices. The people he had counted on to boost his ego, they weren't picking up his calls anymore. Then came the breaking point. One evening, just as I was settling in to watch TV, my phone rang again. I didn't recognize the number at first, but the second I answered, I knew. Hey, it's me. Mark. His voice was different. No arrogance, no cockiness, just pure defeat. What do you want, Mark? I asked, keeping my tone neutral. He hesitated before sighing heavily. I'm losing the house, I smirked. Didn't see that coming, huh? The bank is taking it, he admitted, his voice almost a whisper. I didn't realize how much debt there was. I thought I could sell it before things got bad, but now... He trailed off. I leaned back in my chair. Now you're realizing that just because something is handed to you doesn't mean you actually know how to handle it. He didn't argue, because he knew I was right. I don't have anywhere to go, he muttered after a long pause. I don't have the money to rent a place, and nobody wants to help me. I let his words hang in the air. The same brother who had laughed in my face just weeks ago, who had bragged about having everything while I had nothing, was now coming to me, desperate. And what exactly do you want me to do about that? I asked. Mark sighed again, sounding like it physically pained him to say the words. I was hoping maybe I could crash with you for a while, just until I get back on my feet. I almost laughed. Oh, so now you need my help? You didn't need me when you took everything. You didn't need me when you had the house, the money, the assets. But now that you have nothing? Now you want to crash at my place? Silence. Then, in a broken voice, he said, I don't have anyone else. I smiled to myself. Figure it out, Mark. And then, I hung up. Mark had spent his whole life looking out for himself. Now, he was finally alone. After hanging up on Mark, I sat there for a long time, feeling nothing but satisfaction. For years, he had walked around with an unshakable arrogance, convinced that he was smarter, better, and more deserving than anyone else. He had looked me in the eye, stolen everything, and expected me to just accept it. But now, he had nothing. The house was gone, the savings, drained. His so-called friends, nowhere to be found. And the best part? I hadn't even lifted a finger. All I had done was let him destroy himself. A few days later, I heard through the grapevine that Mark had officially moved out of the house. He had tried to fight the bank, tried to negotiate some kind of deal, but in the end, it was too late. His debts had piled up too high, and without any real income or assets, he was forced to walk away with nothing. At first, I expected him to try again, to beg, to demand, to manipulate his way into getting what he wanted. But he never called, he never texted, he disappeared. And honestly, I didn't care. For the first time in a long time, I was free. No more worrying about whether I was being treated fairly. No more dealing with my brother's smug attitude, his superiority complex, his endless need to prove that he was better than me. I had my own life to focus on. And Mark, he was just a ghost of his own mistakes. But then, a few months later, I ran into someone I hadn't expected. Mark himself. I was grabbing coffee at a small shop near my office when I spotted him in the corner. He looked different. His usual expensive clothes were gone, replaced with a simple, worn-out jacket. His hair was unkempt, and for the first time in his life, he looked tired. He saw me, and instead of looking angry, instead of sneering like he always did, he just looked ashamed. I could have walked away, could have ignored him, pretended he didn't exist. But something in me wanted to see if he had finally learned. So I walked up to his table, took a slow sip of my coffee, and said, "So, how's life treating you?" Mark let out a short, bitter laugh. I guess I deserved that. I sat across from him, studying his face. "You deserved a lot of things, Mark," I said, keeping my tone neutral. "And you got exactly what you asked for." He nodded slowly, rubbing his hands together. "I messed up." I raised an eyebrow. "Just now, figuring that out?" "No," he admitted. "I knew at the moment I lost everything. I just didn't want to say it out loud." For a long time, neither of us spoke. The silence stretched between us, filled with years of resentment, of anger, of choices that couldn't be undone. Then, finally, he met my eyes and said, "I should have split the inheritance. I should have done the right thing." It wasn't an apology, not exactly, but it was the closest thing to one I was ever going to get. I sighed, leaning back. "Yeah," I said simply. "You should have." He nodded, staring down at his coffee. "I lost everything because I was greedy," he admitted. "And I don't expect you to forgive me, but I do want you to know I regret it." I studied him for a long moment, trying to see if this was another act, another attempt at manipulation. But this time, I didn't see arrogance. I didn't see entitlement. I just saw a man who had finally realized what he had done to himself. I stood up, finishing the last of my coffee. "Good luck, Mark," I said. He looked up at me, almost hopeful. "That's it?" I shrugged. "That's more than you ever gave me." And then I walked away, because Mark had made his choices. And now he had to live with them. Walking away from Mark that day, I felt something I hadn't expected: closure. For the first time since the will was read, since he took everything, since he laughed in my face and told me I should have been a better son, I didn't feel angry anymore. Not because I forgave him, not because I pitied him, but because he wasn't my problem anymore. I had spent so much time carrying the weight of his betrayal, of my parents' unfair decision, of feeling like I had been discarded. But now, I had something Mark never would: peace. I didn't need revenge. I didn't need to see him suffer. He had ruined himself. He had been given everything and still ended up with nothing. And me, I had moved on. The months that followed were some of the best of my life. Without the constant shadow of resentment hanging over me, I focused on my own success. I got a promotion, moved into a new apartment, built the kind of life I had always wanted, one I had created for myself. And Mark, he disappeared. At first I heard bits and pieces, how he bounced between jobs, how he was staying with random acquaintances because nobody in the family wanted to take him in. But after a while, even those stories faded away. He was just gone. I thought that was the end of it. Until, nearly a year after our last conversation, I got a letter in the mail. It had no return address, just my name, written in messy handwriting that I immediately recognized. Mark. I sat at my kitchen table, staring at the envelope for a long time before finally opening it. Inside was a single page. I know I don't deserve a response. I know I burned every bridge, but I just wanted to say, I'm sorry for all of it. I don't expect forgiveness. I just needed you to know. That was it. No requests for help, no excuses. Just a simple, too late apology. I exhaled, setting the letter down. Did it change anything? Not really. But for the first time in his life, Mark finally admitted he was wrong. And that was enough. I folded the letter, tucked it into a drawer, and never looked back. Because some mistakes, you just have to live with. After reading Mark's letter, I sat there for a long time, waiting to feel something. Anger, relief, maybe even the tiniest bit of sympathy. But all I felt was done. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't waiting for some grand moment of justice. I had already won. Not in the way Mark had always tried to win, by taking and controlling, but by simply moving on. I put the letter in a drawer and didn't think about it again. Time passed. Life moved forward. Without Mark. Then one evening, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. I almost ignored it, but something told me to pick up. "Hey, it's me." I knew that voice. It was rougher now, more uncertain, more tired. "Mark?" I asked, more surprised than anything. "Yeah." There was a long pause. "I wasn't sure if you'd pick up." I didn't answer that. "What do you want?" He sighed. I don't want anything. I wanted to say it out loud. The letter wasn't enough. I needed to tell you myself. Tell me what? That I messed up. His voice cracked slightly. That I let greed ruin everything. That I pushed you away. That I treated you like nothing, and I lost everything because of it. Another pause. I know I can't fix it, but I need you to know I do regret it. Every day. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling. This was the moment he had been waiting for. The moment he wanted some kind of redemption. Okay, I said simply. That's it? He asked, almost sounding hopeful. What else do you want, Mark? I asked, my voice calm. I don't hate you. I don't wish anything bad on you. But that doesn't mean we go back to the way things were. Some things you just have to live with. He was silent for a long time. Then finally he exhaled. I get it, he admitted. And I'll stop calling. Good luck, Mark, I said. And before he could say anything else, I ended the call. I wasn't holding on to anger anymore. I wasn't waiting for payback. I had something better. I had peace. And Mark, he had regret. After that final call with Mark, I sat there for a long time, staring at my phone. There was no satisfaction, no sense of victory, just finality. Mark had spent his entire life trying to control everything. He had thought money was power, that inheritance was status, that getting everything for himself meant he had won. But in the end, he had nothing. No home, no friends, no support, no family. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't even bitter. I just didn't care. I had spent so much time resenting what he had done, so much time feeling like I had been cheated. But now, I had built something for myself. I had a life that didn't revolve around him, that wasn't defined by what he had taken from me. And Mark, he had lost himself. Weeks passed, months. I didn't hear from him again. I didn't ask about him. And eventually, I stopped wondering what had happened to him at all. Then, one afternoon, I got a message from an old family friend. Did you hear about Mark? I hesitated before replying. Number, what happened? A few minutes passed before the response came in. He left town. No one knows where he went. I stared at the message for a long time, trying to process it. Just like that, he was gone. No farewell, no dramatic exit, just disappeared. And you know what? I didn't care, because for the first time in my life, I was free. Mark had spent so long thinking that having everything made him important. But in the end, he proved something else entirely. If you have everything but no one to share it with, you have nothing at all. Months passed, and Mark remained a ghost. No calls, no texts, no signs of him anywhere. It was like he had simply vanished from existence. At first, I thought I'd feel some kind of closure. After all, wasn't this what I wanted? For him to finally face the consequences of his actions? For him to be forced to live in the mess he made? And yet, every once in a while, I'd catch myself wondering, where had he gone? Was he struggling? Had he learned anything from all of this? Or was he just out there somewhere, still blaming me for everything? Then, one day, I got a letter. No return address, no name, just my own handwriting scrawled across the front of an envelope. I knew before I even opened it. Inside, there was no long-winded apology, no desperate plea for help, just a few short sentences written in shaky handwriting. I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't even know if I forgive myself, but I wanted you to know you were right about all of it. No excuses, no justifications, just acceptance. I stared at the letter for a long time, waiting to feel something. Anger, relief, maybe even a small flicker of sympathy. But in the end, all I felt was peace. Mark had finally realized the truth. I wasn't the one who had lost. He was. And while he was out there, wherever he had gone, trying to figure out who he was now that he had nothing, I was exactly where I belonged. I had a life, a future, a family that actually cared about me. And Mark, he had regret. That was the only inheritance he had left. And it was one he had earned. Greed doesn't just destroy relationships, it destroys people. Mark thought he could take everything and still come out on top. But in the end, he only robbed himself. Now, let me ask you, have you ever dealt with family betrayal like this? How did it change your life? Drop your stories in the comments. I'd love to hear them. And if you made it this far, don't forget to like and subscribe. See you in the next one.